Today is January 23rd, 2024. This is episode 50 and the 12th episode of season 3 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Mike Koomar. Tonight, Mike and I will go over a lot of the action from the weekend, and we won't do much of the action tonight unless it is a real big surprise. But Mike, we'll start off how we do always, and we're going to go with your team of the week.
Thanks, Sean. There weren't a whole lot of options for Team of the Week. The two teams that had big wins on Saturday, that would be West Virginia and Pitt. They both had double-digit losses earlier in the week, so I can't really give them Team of the Week. So I'm going to go with the number one team in the country, and I'm going to go with the UConn Huskies. They had another two pretty solid wins this past week. Got a double-digit win over Creighton, 14 points, and that game seemed like it was a lot bigger of a win for them because that game was never close. They dominated in that one. And then over the weekend, survived against the Villanova Wildcats, a game that a lot of people thought they were going to drop. It was nearly 19,000 people there at the Wells Fargo Center, home to the 76ers. So a big home court advantage for Villanova, but UConn just found a way to lock it down in the last second of that game. It looked like they were going to lose it for a while. They didn't really play that well coming down the stretch, but they got the win, and that's a big one for them.
Yeah, obviously, Mike, I don't think we, really need to go into the details of the games. Like you said, they played fine, well defensively at times, but certainly they didn't kind of blow them out like they're capable of. But at this point, Mike, with where the Big East is at, they are easily going to win this league. They are already winning by a game over Seton Hall, by 2 games over Creighton, and by 2.5 games over Marquette, Villanova, and Xavier. So at this point, it really is a race for second. And if you had to pick, who you gone with for that second spot?
Hey, Sean, I'm going to go with Seton Hall. They just had a devastating win on Saturday, triple overtime loss to Creighton. But with that being said, they look really good. They're competing in all of their games. You look at their next 3. I think Marquette's been super vulnerable, but I think they're the only team ranked with 5 losses right now. They're ranked 14th. So I think they're a little bit overrated personally. But you look at their next 3. Home versus Providence, I think they get the job done. At Marquette, I think they can get a win there. And then at DePaul is an easy win for them. So I think they're going to be in a really good spot heading into February. Only 6 games in the month of February for the Pirates, but it'll be 9 games down, 9 games to go in the conference season, and I like Seton Hall a lot right now.
Yeah, it's a good transition, Mike, into that heartbreaking loss for the Hall at home on Saturday, and we picked 2 of the games in the Big East last show, and we had a lot of love for the home teams there, and this was a big theme this weekend in the Big East. The road teams showed up. We've talked about, rightfully so, how tough it is to win on the road this year, but the road teams put up a great effort. Started on Friday with Georgetown. They went all the way down the stretch. Should have probably won at Xavier. You had Marquette winning at St. John's. You had Creighton winning at Seton Hall. And then you had UConn winning at Villanova. So that triple overtime game was really tough for Seton Hall. They're still able to hang around. But Mike, Kadari Richmond is their best player by far. He's a great player, but 8 of 32 from the field. He did have a triple-double on the game, but you're just going to need a little bit more from him, especially a couple of those short-range shots that he was missing.
Yeah, absolutely. That was far from Kadari Richmond's best game, but the way I would spin it is I think Kadari Richmond had probably his worst game in conference play, and they still almost beat one of the few good remaining teams in the Big East right now. So, obviously, there's a lot left to be said. He scored 21 points. Yeah, they played an extra 15 minutes in that game. So, I do still think that they're going to be fine. Not a great matchup for them with Ryan Kalkbrenner, who had 28 in this game. And that's, I think, also part of their struggles in this one. But I'm not worried if I'm Seton Hall. It's just the second game they've dropped in conference, and they still look really good.
Yeah, it's just one of those games, I think, where, Creighton comes in off – they come to the East Coast, and the Big East does this a lot, especially for the teams out in the Midwest where you play, multiple road games, and you probably played the first and the second best team on the road before going home to Nebraska, and you got one of them. I think they should take that. And
absolutely.
They kind of just got snuffed at Connecticut, only putting up 48 points, but they'll be thinking pretty good about the trip, and Seton Hall. It stinks that they dropped this one because we did go over their next two very winnable games. And they go on the road to Marquette. They already beat them at once, so at the very worst, you're taking a split with the Golden Eagles. So it's really, there is a big top four right now. I think Villanova, Xavier, and St. John's are going to be on the outside of it. Marquette, like you said, ranked but with 5 losses. People thought that they could win this league this year. Probably a drop below that. Still a good team, but not elite. Creighton's starting to figure things out. Seton Hall and UConn. That's kind of the Big East right now, Mike. And the only other thing from this league is, unfortunately, what happened at the bottom. DePaul at 3-15 has parted ways with Tony Stubblefield. Certainly not a surprise that this happened, but maybe a little bit that this quickly at the end of January.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and you wonder what's wrong with DePaul. I don't know so much about that program, but that program has been in shambles for pretty much the last 18, 20 years. And it's a program that used to be a really, really good program. At worst, a competent program in the late 90s and early 2000s. But you wonder what's going on. They've got a hotbed of talent. They're in Chicago. They've got competition with Illinois Northwestern, but there's so much talent there. They've got good resources. They've got a new gym. I think some pretty good facilities. So you wonder what for them, Sean. I really don't know.
Yeah, he's certainly not the first one to fail, and he probably won't be the last. A couple names have popped up here and there, but at this point, Mike, with where they're at in the Big East, would a high-ranking mid-major coach go there, or would he take his chance at a bigger school? They might have to search pretty far and wide for their next head basketball coach.
Yeah, this kind of seems like, I don't know if any college football fans out there, like the Kansas football job for, about 10, 15 years in there where you were destined to fail. It didn't matter what you did or who you had on staff with you. And you start to wonder the same thing with DePaul. I mean, this program has been insufferable, Sean, for the last 5 or 6 years. I don't even know if they have an NIT bid in the last 20 years. I could be wrong. Maybe they do, but
not one that comes to mind for me.
No, I mean, this is a really, really bad program in a prominent conference, and it just seems like you're destined for failure.
Yeah, even, I'm trying to think, 2-3 years ago when they had Javon Freeman Liberty, they were okay, but they were still like 8th in the conference, and it's not that hard to get to 8th. Especially, they did beat Louisville. They did win the Tank Bowl, but at this point, some names, Dusty May, Josh Schertz have come up, but why would those guys leave Florida Atlantic and Indiana State for that right now?
No, I would not leave Florida Atlantic for this job, especially with how much security Dusty May has. I don't really think DePaul's a step up from the team that you coached the Final Four a year ago.
Especially now that FAU is in the American Conference, which will be a double bid, at least 2-bid league. And then a lot of people are saying Josh Schertz from Indiana State. The way that the Missouri Valley's looking this year, likely going to be a 2-bid league too. So they might have to get a little bit creative with who they look at. But the one thing that you can promise to your fans when you hire a new coach is that it can't get worse, because they don't have a Big East win, and they're unlikely to get one at this point, I would think.
Yeah, I would. I just checked on the last time that DePaul had any real postseason berth would be the NITs. They made the quarterfinals in 2006-2007 season. Before that, their last NCAA tournament bid was with Coach Dave Lieto at 2003-2004. So, this is a long time, a long dry spell for this program without having success, especially with how much success they had, late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
It's one of the
bad.
I don't know if they're a founding member of the Big East, but if you think about back to the 16 team, they are an original member of the 16 team Big East. They have been around through it all, back when, Syracuse and Louisville and Cincinnati and West Virginia and USF, they were in that conference, and they were often 16th, but, the Big East is probably, the other teams have certainly liked that the team at the bottom hasn't changed over the years, but it's probably better for the sport if, once in a while they, just for college basketball's sake, that they do make the tournament here. But they're a long way away from that. So, Mike, we'll wrap up with DePaul, and we'll go to the Big 12. Very interesting week. We talked about it last week of how much up and down we'd see in this conference, and that certainly tracked no more so than the Texas Longhorns, who were able to defeat Baylor on Saturday, like I picked, but I kind of got that half wrong because I did say they'd beat UCF at home last Wednesday. They lose to UCF, but they get Baylor. Treading water, I guess, at this point for the Longhorns. I know they're in action now, too.
Yeah, they're in action. They're actually looking pretty good. On the road at Norman, Oklahoma, against their arch rival, the Sooners, and they're up by 3 at the 12-minute timeout in the second half. So they're looking a lot better. I'll be honest, though, Sean. I thought that their game against Baylor, I think Baylor lost it more than Texas won it. Baylor only had 1 field goal made in the last 9 minutes of that game. And I think it's really an indictment on the program for the Baylor Bears right now. But at the end of the day, Sean, it's a huge win for them. They were pressing the panic button after that loss to Central Florida. I think it honestly put them on the outside looking into the tournament. But a win over a top 10 team, doesn't matter how you did it, you got the job done, and that's big for that.
Yeah, I think Texas was very lucky to win the game against Baylor. They played awesome in the first half. They made a lot of threes. So did Baylor. And then they kind of held on.
They fell flat
for their life at the end. But a win's a win. Home crowd definitely got them over the line. Asmus and Hunter haven't really worked this year, but they did in this game, 21 and 15. And then Dylan Dessou is really kind of back now, and that's where we saw this team. They're not going to be in the top half of the Big 12 probably, but at least there's a chance that they make the tournament at this point. And if they win tonight, we'll talk about it later, Mike, but if they win tonight, things are looking pretty good.
And you look at that play where they made the buzzer beater to beat the Baylor Bears. The key to that play, yes, Hunter ran the floor and got a layup. The key to that play was a decoy at the middle of the court, which was Dylan Dessou. How much that he's respected not only as a center, but a guy that can bring the ball up the court and shoot is huge for the University of Texas and their success going forward.
Yeah, he was really big last year, too, when he kind of, blossomed out of his role player role into a go-to guy, and he was the reason why they beat Penn State in that round of 32 game.
Absolutely.
And he had 4 fouls, didn't play much against UCF, turns it around with a good performance against Baylor. But, Mike, probably the biggest shocking result of the weekend, I would say, was down in Morgantown, and that was West Virginia knocking off Kansas. Kansas has now lost to UCF and West Virginia this year. They did back it up with a close victory yesterday over Cincinnati, but did not see this coming from the Jayhawks.
Yeah, and the Jayhawks really seem to be struggling of late, I'll be honest, Sean. They started the year. They should have lost that game to TCU. I don't want to make any mistake about that. They got super lucky there in that one. Turned around, lost to Central Florida. Had a couple of nice convincing wins against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. But then, this game was shocking. Absolutely shocking. This is probably the worst team in the Big 12 this year. But it also shows that it doesn't matter who you are in the Big 12. You can lose to anybody, and you cannot take a single game or a team for granted. Because West Virginia is having about as down year as you can have with Huggins being gone. Lost a lot of players, but they showed up and showed out in Morgantown. And weird things happen in Morgantown, I can tell you that. Kansas did follow that up with a win, albeit unconvincing against a good Cincinnati team. Cincinnati's a really good team. They're 2-4 in conference. They're a lot better than that.
Yeah, they were 3 of 20 from behind the arc. Cincinnati, this is on the road at Kansas and lost by 5. And if they just make a couple of shots, they're winning.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is they shoot 17% from 3-point range. If you, like you said, if they make a couple, they win this game. So that's not a good look for Kansas. And we've seen this a lot before, where Kansas has some early struggles in early to mid-January. We saw this last year too, Sean, when they lost by like 25 to TCU. Wrapped around, and by the end of the year, they were the number 1 team in the country. And if not for Bill Self's medical issues, I think they won the tournament. But it's definitely some concern in Manhattan, Kansas, or Lawrence, Kansas, rather.
Yeah, Johnny Furphy has come into the starting lineup for the Jayhawks. He Bill Self seems to be leaning towards the we got to play him a lot so he figures it out by the end of the year mentality.
Yeah.
He's not good defensively. He's just not. He's like a
No.
6'9" skinny guard who he's not fast enough to cover guards and he's not big enough to cover forwards. But he's
But he
really
can shoot the cover off the ball.
he's really lighting it up offensively since he went into the starting lineup, which I believe is 3 games. He's played over 30 minutes. All of those times he's gone 15, 13, and 23. He had a 23 and 11 double yesterday. If he doesn't do that, if he doesn't have 16 points more than his average, they're losing at home to Cincinnati. But
Oh yeah.
his parents were there, happy for him. They seem to be leaning into him as the 5th guy, and that's probably the best long term for them. But they may have a couple more, shocking results in the short term. They still are 4-2 and 16-3 on the season. It just doesn't feel like this team is that good, and they're still my pick to win the Big 12 regular season because that seems to happen all but one year in the last 15 years or something. But these are the kind of signs of a team that gets bounced early in the tournament.
Yeah.
Over the
absolutely.
years. Now you never want to say that for a Bill Self team, but they've had some close calls. They finally got clipped by a West Virginia team who shot 58% from 3, and they are starting to play a little better, the Mountaineers, since they got some of their waiver guys back, like Raekwon Battle, and
Raekwon Battle, yeah.
They're not horrible. They still probably are the worst team in the conference, but Morgantown used to be the long trip in the Big 12 before this year. Now you got to go to Orlando and Provo and all these other places, but that used to be the long trip. And
I don't really care what you say. If you get a win in Morgantown, even with how poor West Virginia is this year, if you get a win against them in conference in front of that fan base, that's a good win. It's a damn good win. So it's just really tough to win there, as is in a lot of places in the Big 12. But one person that I'm looking at for Sean, real quick, is Hunter Dickinson. He has had a lot of up and down games. He did not play well against Cincinnati, so I think that's one guy that Kansas has got to get going a little bit more now.
Hey, he only took 7 shots in 30 minutes. You'd like to see him.
Fouls, yeah.
You'd like to see him put it up a couple more times because he is a really good offensive player. He might struggle in the ball screen coverage on defense, and might not have the tallest vertical, but he is as skilled as it comes around the basket with a coach who is as good as it gets of getting his best players looks, and that's a little bit of a warning sign. I know that Cincinnati plays with basically 2 7-footers and plays a style that is not very common, but you still like to see him take more than 7 shots. But Mike, another topic here in the Big 12 is the team that currently is leading the conference, and that's the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Up and down week for them. They get smoked at Houston, and then they get the job done in a big comeback win against BYU.
Super interesting. I give Texas Tech some credit last week. They're not one of the top 3 teams in the conference. It's not going to stay that way. They've had probably the easiest of schedules so far in the Big 12. But to give them credit, they've won a lot of tight games. But they got smoked at Houston. I think that was a long time coming, though. Tech has been riding high. Houston lost a couple of games in a row that they shouldn't have. So, they'll remain. They're going to be a competitive team. They will be in the top half. But I don't think they're one of the top 3, 4, 5 teams in the conference.
Yeah, I thought this win against BYU at home was so important. They were down by 18 at one point in this game, and we talked about it last week, Mike. This is their 2 of their 4 games through this stretch where they're playing 4 ranked teams, 3 of them on the road. You got to win that game at home. They do. They have Oklahoma and TCU on the road. But no, 1 of 2, you take that all day right there, because Big 12's a tough conference. I still think they're definitely tournament bound at this point, probably in the 6 to 7 seed range, but I like what I'm seeing from Grant McCaslin's team. They're sharing the ball. He's getting a lot out of his guards. I do think they can beat anyone when they're playing at home.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I want to talk a little bit about BYU. This is a team that they've lost some really big leads already this year. They lost a 15-point lead at home against Cincinnati. They had a 9-point lead over Baylor on the road. And then this one, a 16-point lead at halftime at Texas Tech. That's a tough place to play. But you can't lose a 16-point lead in a game like this. And they fought till the end, but it wasn't enough, man. They got smoked in the second half. So BYU's got to find a way to make adjustments and close out games in the second half.
They got a home game against Houston tonight. That will be real interesting. I
Big
think
one.
their season is kind of at a crossroads right now. You know, they lose at home tonight, drop to 2-4. You know, I'm not saying like that they're gonna, lose the rest of the way, but they were analytically a top 5 team at the beginning of the country by blowing out a lot of bad teams, and now the flaws of that argument are starting to kind of show up. I still think they're much better than any of us thought going into the year, and they're still
Absolutely.
they're still headed towards the tournament. But this team is good enough to be a 3 or 4 seed from what we've seen so far. And if they just kind of fall down to the physicalness of the Big 12, they could drag into that 7 or 8 spot, which they really don't deserve from what we've seen.
No, Sean, if you play 20 minutes of basketball, the first 20 minutes of basketball, this Brigham Young team is a top 7 team in the country. They just got to play the next 20 minutes. And that's the issue right now.
They do host Texas on Saturday after the Houston game tonight, especially if they lose the Houston one.
Yeah, that's a huge game. That's a must-win game for Brigham Young, especially if they don't win this Houston game, which I don't think they will.
And they have West Virginia on the road the next game after. So, season's at a crossroads. Whether they're headed for an 8-9 seed or a 3 or 4 seed could determine or be what happens these next 3 games. So one more topic, Mike, from the Big 12. Actually, never mind. We're gonna hold that off. We're gonna move on to the ACC now. Not much to talk about from this league other than the fact that North Carolina is most certainly going to win this title. They are 8-0 in the Big East, including 5 road wins. They are all the way up to number 3 in the country. And after losing by 1 at halftime to Wake Forest yesterday, they outscored the Demon Deacons 52-30 in the second half to make it look like it was an easy win. Mike, you got to like what you're seeing from the Tar Heels at this point.
Oh, yeah. The only game that they've really struggled with in the second half, it seems, at least lately, was against Boston College. The game ended up being a 10-point win, but that game was a lot closer until the very end. I think this game went down to the last 2 minutes. BC trailed by 6 until then. But this is a really good North Carolina team. And what a turnaround from last year when they were by far probably the most disappointing college basketball team we've seen in at least a decade, maybe even 2. So they're moving the ball really well. They've got so much experience. And what we've talked about, Sean, on this show is that they have depth right now. And that depth is huge. Even if those guys are getting 7 to 10 minutes a game, that's enough. And they're getting 9 guys that are getting that. So really huge for UNC. If they get into foul trouble, they've got a way out of it with their depth, and they've got a lot of experience.
Yeah, I think certainly more depth than last year. It's not like that they have 10 players who play 20 minutes a game. They're just getting like an average output from the bench, but that's just light years above where it was last year. The bench players last year were not playable, if you didn't want to lose the segment. And now you can throw a Trimble or Washington in there for a couple minutes, and it's working. Hubert has got it working right now. R.J. Davis is averaging 21 points a game. He's at this point headed towards a potential ACC Player of the Year. Harrison Ingram, huge get from Stanford. He's really proven to be a good scorer, especially since Baycott usually gets the best big defender. Things are going on for them right now. Kiddo is really coming on as a freshman point guard. They are definitely going to win this league. And Mike, at this point, the only other definite tournament team in the ACC is their noisy neighbors, Duke. And that's sort of just out of nobody else is really that good except for Duke. So, with the Blue Devils?
Duke's had a pretty bumpy road this year. Right now, they're up by 7 against Louisville, and that's not really saying much.
They're supposed to win that
Um,
game by 24, so their numbers will be hit.
yeah, oh yeah, and you talked about the other big upset. They lost at home to Pitt. I think that's the first home loss of John Shire's tenure at Duke. Before that, a 5-point win over Georgia Tech at home. That wasn't very impressive. Before that, an 8-point win on the road against Notre Dame. That is not an impressive at all, especially because that game went down the last minute 45 seconds in that one. Um, so, I mean, Duke is just all over the place. They had that nice win against Baylor earlier on in the year, but I don't really know what to think of the Blue Devils, Sean, other than they'll make the tournament, but they're not really playing stiff competition, so it's tough to gauge how
Yeah,
well they really are.
the Pitt loss was alarming considering they knocked him off by 24 or 22 on Pitt's floor 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I know you're missing a couple guys, and I know they've been really injured this year, but the reason why you brought in all these 5 stars is so that they could play, and you know you got to be ready to come off the bench. And there's no reason they should have lost that Pitt game. That game was neck and neck the whole way. It really could have gone either way, but Pitt's hoping for that in a game at Duke. Let's have it be a game at the end and see if we can pick it off.
Yeah.
Duke's plan was to put them away early and cruise, and they never did. And when you get a team like Pitt who's knocking down shots, they can believe that every team believes they can win every game until they're down by 12 or whatever by the first media timeout. And that never went away for Pitt, and they pick up an unlikely victory. But
Yeah. And
Mitchell and Roach will be back soon, and they'll be better, but still alarming.
They will, yeah, absolutely. But you look at this, Sean, this year, and you look at the bottom 4 teams in the conference. Like I talked about, Notre Dame, Pitt, Georgia Tech, and Louisville. They lost to 2 of them. They're in a dogfight with another one, and they barely beat the other. It's not good.
It's not how you win the league.
Nope.
You can lose games to good teams and win leagues. League winners every year have 3 or 4 or 5 losses. Those have got to be against the teams around you. I know that hurts for tiebreaker reasons, but you are definitely losing a game on the field by losing to these bad teams,
Yes.
and they're in a dogfight again today. But other than that, Mike, you've got a couple teams in the ACC you'll be around the bubble, like Virginia, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Florida State, NC State. I mean, there is not much.
Clemson now, yeah.
Clemson's been dragged down into that category. They're probably on the right side as of now, but they're 13-5 all of a sudden. Not much else to like other than the 2 teams in North Carolina in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. Schools like Virginia, I don't really see how you can put UVA in the big dance right now. Their metrics are horrendous. They don't really have any good quality wins. You look at the tough teams they played out of conference, Memphis, who's been struggling in the last week. They lost by 23 points. And on top of that, how shoddy this conference season has been for them, with a couple of really bad losses and a couple of close wins. It's not a good look for UVA.
I think we're headed towards go back 2 years, Mike, when Duke and North Carolina ended up making the championship game with a great run late. But they're the second best seeded team in the ACC last year as an 8. Now, I don't think Duke will drop that far, but say UNC's a 1 or 2, Duke's a 5 or 6. Nobody else is going to be far away from the bubble, and that is bad news. Because that means the bubble teams have to win games to stay in the bubble if they're not playing Duke or Carolina. In other conferences, like Cincinnati's on the bubble and they have a tough week, 2 road games, they don't necessarily have to win those. So, it's less than 2 months until Selection Sunday. It's time to start thinking about the bubble and where you're at and where your numbers are. And the ACC's numbers are terrible. I think we sort of saw that coming with a poor non-conference because you can't really improve them a ton when you're just playing each other. But I think the optimism for the ACC coming into the year is
out the door.
Is way out the door. Other than the Blues in Chapel Hill. But Mike, we'll hit the SEC real quick. At this point, this was kind of what the ACC was hoping for, I think, this year.
Yeah.
And Kentucky is losing right now, and they're down by 15 at the end of
They're going
4.
to lose.
So they're going to lose to South Carolina, but you still do have 3 teams ranked in the top 10. You have an Alabama team who has certainly looked better than 12-6. But who is your pick to win the SEC with everything that you know now?
I'm going to go with the 8th team in the country. I'm going to go with the Auburn Tigers. They have looked so good. They lost that first game of the year to Baylor, and since then just one other loss, and they're looking good. They crushed Ole Miss over the weekend. And in general, most of their games aren't even looking close. A&M, that game was tight for a little bit, but they ended up pulling away at the end in that one. They're just on a roll right now, and they've got a really tough game on Saturday at University of Alabama. But then after that, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt to close out January, and then you've got Ole Miss on the road. And I think they'll win all of those games. So I'm really confident with them right now, Sean. Kentucky is a really good team, but they're pretty volatile. Like this game against South Carolina, South Carolina is a pretty solid team. They're underrated, I would say, because they've only got 3 losses on the year, but you can't lose that game. With that being said, the SEC is looking really good. They're definitely, at least in my opinion, the second best conference in college basketball. Close with the Big Ten, but I'm going to give them the slight edge. They look really good right now, and they've got a lot of really solid teams right there in the middle, like Alabama. Georgia has surprisingly been pretty solid this year.
Yeah.
The only big disappointment really is A&M, who's been well underperforming this year.
Yeah, Arkansas too. Those are the two.
Arkansas, of course.
Those are the two disappointments that were up there in the beginning of the year. But
other than that, look good.
Yeah, I think this is Tennessee's. I think what we've expected. Auburn has been amazing, but the only knock on Auburn, they don't have any quad 1 wins yet. Now, that might change by not playing because they have a couple of team wins against teams that are just outside that threshold, whether it's 25 at home, 50 on a neutral, or 75 on the road. So, they could win, and they could have 4 by tomorrow. But they're certainly winning this conference. They're probably my pick too. But with the next 2 games on the road, Alabama and Mississippi State, if they can get those, they're in great shape. Even if they get 1, they're probably still in good shape because, Kentucky is about to take their second loss in the conference season, and Tennessee has 1 loss. So at the very minimum, they'd be tied with them. But a lot to be excited about from the SEC. A lot of hype coming in. I think that was tempered down a little bit with A&M struggling in Arkansas, but with Auburn going up there and Kentucky looking real good until tonight, and then Tennessee being Tennessee, there's a lot to like from the SEC. But Mike, I know they lost or losing tonight, but Kentucky showed out on Saturday in their win against Georgia, led by their brand new player, whose name is tough to pronounce, Zvonimir Ivisic, Big Z, as he's called, the Croatian freshman. He became eligible earlier in the day. Georgia didn't know he was playing until a couple hours before. And in 16 minutes, he has 13 points, 3 threes, assist behind the back. He only had 3 points tonight, but what a debut for the young man.
Yeah, that is a really, really good player. Look out for the rest of the SEC. My only concern for Kentucky in that game is he gave up 96 points to Georgia. Like I said, Georgia's a better team than they have been in the last several years, but they gave up 61 points in the second half, Sean. 61. Got to play some defense.
Well, the game was over, and it was never in doubt, but still, they have their bench players, their reserve squad of Shepard, Dillingham, Onyeso, Ivisic, and these are starters for. Those are starters on top 25 teams. So you say, oh, well, we took the starters out. Well, your second unit's pretty good, too. So that can't happen. And their defense isn't great, which is a big knock on them. But the reason why they're going to lose this game tonight, Mike, is because they've got 57 points with 2 minutes left. So that's what happens when you kind of launch threes constantly. Some days you are not going to make them. I did watch this game in the first half. They did look awful. Let's see what their 3-point numbers are at. So 3 of 11.
Three
So
of
they're
11.
not really launching them.
No.
No, the percentage isn't great, but they're not really launching them. So we'll see how they bounce back from this. They go to Bud Walton on Saturday. Though Arkansas's playing, certainly like the Wildcats' chances in that one, especially off a bounce back spot, which Calipari's been pretty good at over the years. So, Mike, that is all of our conference talk for this episode. A couple of picks we're going to get into for this week. We're going to start tomorrow in the SEC. Auburn at Alabama. The Crimson Tide have opened as slight favorites. Who you got in this one?
I'm actually, I think Auburn's going to win the SEC, but I don't think they're going to win tomorrow night. I'm going to go with the upset, go with the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I think it's time. This is going to be a really good game, by the way. 7:30 Eastern on ESPN. This is a real big opportunity for both teams. Alabama is 12-6, but their numbers look great because they've hung with some good teams and killed some good teams too. And Auburn's like, well, our numbers are great too, but we haven't beaten anybody. So, big game. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go for Auburn, but I do really like both these teams and could really could go either way. Next game tomorrow night, Mike, is over in Big Ten country. We've got an Illinois in-state rivalry. It's the Fighting Illini with Terrence Shannon back. Go on the road to Northwestern, 9 o'clock Eastern on the Big Ten Network. I'm going to go for the home team here, Northwestern.
Whoa.
They've looked better recently at home. Illinois has been good at home too, but I think Northwestern gets them here.
IOL. I'm going to go with the Fighting Illini on this one. Illinois, they finally got Terrence Shannon back. Not sure how long he'll be back here for with his criminal proceedings being in February. But with that being said, Illinois is so much better with him, even if he's not playing his best like he was on Sunday. Illinois crushed Northwestern without him, beat him by, I think, 30 points earlier in the year. So I don't think they're going to win by this much this time, but I think the Illini are going to win.
Yeah, so those are really Wednesday's games, Mike. And in an ideal world, we'll get another episode out on Thursday. There's not much on Thursday either, other than some lopsided Pac-12 games. So I think we'll end it there for picks, and we'll hopefully get a much larger pick segment in for the weekend because, once again, weekend in January and February, there's a ton of good games. Hopefully they're not all at the same time this weekend. There were 3 awesome games at noon on last Saturday, and I wasn't even home, so trying to keep track of all 3 of those were really tough. And I'll put out a game slate post for Saturday, as I've done a couple times, and hopefully we'll see you on Thursday. But if not, we'll see you early next week, and if not, be sure to like and subscribe and check out our next In a Nutshell podcast with Joe Mead, also coming out later this week. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.